The elevator descended for 11 minutes. I checked my watch 3 times during the journey, listening to the hum of machinery that carried me deeper beneath the Vatican than any tourist would ever venture. Cardinal Bishop stood beside me, clutching a leather briefcase filled with documents that smelled of incense and old paper. The previous warden lasted 18 months, Cardinal Bishop said, breaking the silence. Longer than most. What happened to him? Retirement. Early retirement. The cardinal's fingers drummed against the briefcase handle. Dr. Williams will brief you on the medical protocols. The residents require specialized care. I had read the files during my 3-day orientation in Rome. The Vatican had headhunted me specifically for this assignment after my successful management of a maximum security federal prison in Colorado. My record showed innovation in handling difficult inmates and a reputation for maintaining order without excessive force. What the files hadn't mentioned was the true nature of the residents I would be overseeing. 27 beings, each contained in individual units designed by Vatican architects who'd sworn oaths of secrecy before beginning their work. The project had taken 40 years to complete, hidden beneath layers of bureaucracy and historical renovation permits. The official documents described it as a specialized theological research facility. But I had been briefed on the reality during my final meeting with Vatican officials. The elevator stopped. Steel doors opened to reveal a circular hallway lined with monitors displaying vital signs, temperature readings, and containment status indicators. A man in a white coat approached us, extending his hand. "Dr. James Williams," he said. "Welcome to Sublevel 17. I shook the doctor's hand, noting his firm grip and steady gaze. Dr. Williams looked like he hadn't slept well in months, with dark circles under his eyes and the pale complexion of someone who spent too much time underground. Despite his appearance, his voice remained professional and steady. "Cardinal Bishop, I assume you've explained the basic structure?" "The warden knows what he needs to know," the cardinal replied. "Show him the observation deck first." We walked down the curved hallway, passing maintenance panels and emergency stations that looked like they belonged in a space station rather than a religious facility. The air carried a faint hum from the ventilation system and the subtle scent of ozone from the electronic monitoring equipment. I counted doors as we passed. Each one bore a simple number and a small viewing window made of thick glass that appeared to be several inches deep. The first few appeared empty, containing only basic furniture and white walls, but as we continued, I began to notice movement behind the glass. Between occupied cells, I saw rooms that served other purposes. A kitchen where prepared meals waited on heated shelves. A medical bay with equipment I didn't recognize. A library with books in languages I couldn't identify. Dr. Williams explained that different residents had different needs, and the facility had been designed to accommodate all of them. "Cell 7 houses our oldest resident," Dr. Williams explained, stopping beside a door marked with that number. "We call her Nephilia. She's been here since the facility opened, and she helped us understand what type of environment would work best." I looked through the window. Inside the white-walled room, a woman sat cross-legged on the floor, her back to the door. Long black hair fell to her waist, and she wore a simple gray dress that looked clean and well-maintained. She appeared to be drawing something on the floor with her finger. "What's she drawing?" "Mathematical equations. Always mathematical equations. She solved several theorems that have puzzled scholars for centuries, but she refuses to explain her work." Dr. Williams paused, watching Nephilia through the glass. "We've had Nobel Prize winners request consultations with her. She acknowledges their presence, but never responds to their questions." "Has anyone tried building a relationship with her first? Maybe she doesn't trust academic strangers." The previous warden tried that approach. Patterson spent months trying to establish rapport with several residents. Toward the end, he claimed they were sharing memories with him directly, showing him events from their past. The Vatican decided his judgment had become compromised. I studied Nephilia more carefully. Her movements were fluid and graceful as she drew, each line placed with obvious purpose and meaning. The equations she created covered the entire floor space, creating an intricate pattern that looked almost artistic despite being purely mathematical. We moved to the next occupied cell. Through the window, I saw a man sitting at a small table, carefully folding what appeared to be paper into complex shapes. His movements were deliberate and focused, with the steady rhythm of someone who had performed the same task countless times. Bale, he makes origami. We provide him with exactly 1,000 sheets of paper each month, and he folds them all into the same pattern. A 6-pointed star, but with modifications we can't quite replicate. Dr. Williams gestured toward a storage room visible through an adjacent window. We've tried to preserve his work for study, but it's proven challenging. What happens to the finished pieces? They dissolve at midnight, every single one, regardless of when he completed it. We've tried different types of paper, different storage methods, even photographing the folding process step by step. The result is always the same. The physical objects simply cease to exist at exactly 12 o'clock. I studied the man through the glass. Bale appeared to be middle-aged, with careful hands and intense concentration. His workspace was perfectly organized, with neat stacks of unfolded paper on one side and completed stars arranged in precise rows on the other. Bale looked up suddenly, making direct eye contact with me. The man's face showed no expression, but he held up one of his paper creations, displaying it clearly in the window light before setting it back on the table with the others. They know we're watching, I observed. Always, Dr. Williams confirmed. But knowledge and reaction are different things. Some acknowledge our presence, others ignore us completely. A few have never looked toward the door in all their years here. As we walked to the next cell, I noticed that the monitoring stations between doors showed different types of readings for each resident. Heart rate, brain activity, and temperature were standard, but some monitors displayed measurements I didn't recognize. When I asked about them, Dr. Williams explained that the beings required specialized medical attention. Their physiology isn't quite human, he said. Similar enough that we can provide basic care, but different enough that we've had to develop new protocols. Bale, for instance, doesn't require sleep in the traditional sense. He enters a meditative state for exactly 4 hours each night, but his brain activity during that time is unlike anything we see in human REM cycles. We continued the tour. Cell 12 contained a woman who stood perfectly still in the center of her room, arms at her sides, eyes closed. According to Dr. Williams, she had maintained that exact position for 7 years. We provide nutrition intravenously, he explained. She doesn't resist the procedure, but she never breaks her stance either. What's her name? Seraph. Though the names were assigned by the Vatican committee, we don't know what they called themselves before. I paused at cell 15. Inside, I saw what looked like a teenage boy, perhaps 16 or 17 years old, sitting on his bed and reading a book. The scene appeared completely normal until I noticed the book itself. Is that book floating? About 3 inches above his hands, yes. He's been reading the same novel for 4 months now. When he reaches the end, he starts over from the beginning. What book? To Kill a Mockingbird. We asked him why he chose it, and he said it reminded him of home. The final stop on our tour was the observation deck, a glass-walled room that provided a view of the entire facility's central area. I could see into multiple cells from this vantage point, watching the residents go about their daily routines. Your office is through that door, Dr. Williams said, pointing to an adjacent room. You'll have access to all monitoring systems, medical reports, and incident logs. Cardinal Bishop opened his briefcase and handed me a thick folder. These are your immediate concerns. 3 residents have shown behavioral changes in the past month. We need your assessment of whether enhanced containment protocols are necessary. I opened the folder and read the first report. Subject 17, known as Raphael, had begun humming. The notation seemed innocuous until I read further. The humming occurred at the same time each day, lasted exactly 17 minutes, and could be heard throughout the entire facility, despite the soundproofing. The humming started 3 weeks ago, Dr. Williams explained. We've measured the frequency, analyzed the pattern, but can't determine its purpose. Does it affect the other residents? That's what we need you to determine. Some of them have altered their usual routines since it began. Nothing dramatic, but noticeable to those who've observed them for years. I closed the folder and looked out at the cells below. In one room, Nephilia continued drawing equations on the floor. In another, Bale folded his paper stars with steady concentration. The boy with the floating book turned a page without looking up. How many staff members work down here? Day shift has 6 guards, 1 medical technician, and myself. Night shift reduces to 4 guards and an emergency medical team on call. You'll have complete authority over security protocols and containment procedures. Cardinal Bishop checked his watch. I have obligations above. Warden Hayes, your first report is due in 1 week. Any questions before I leave? I had dozens of questions, but I sensed this was not the time to ask them. I'll review the files and submit my assessment as scheduled. After the Cardinal departed, Dr. Williams led me to my office. The room contained a desk, multiple computer monitors, and filing cabinets that looked like they hadn't been opened in months. The previous warden, Patterson, left some notes in the bottom drawer. Might be helpful, might not. He wasn't much for documentation. I sat behind the desk and pulled open the drawer. Inside, I found a single notebook filled with handwritten observations. The entries were dated but sparse. Day 15. Nephilia drew something new today. Not equations. Looked like a map. Day 23. Bale made a different shape. Still 6-pointed but folded differently. Asked Williams about it. He said it was probably nothing. Day 41. The humming started. Raphael seems calm, but something feels different. Day 44. 3 residents changed their sleep patterns, all going to bed exactly 1 hour earlier. Day 50. I don't think they're prisoners. I looked up from the notebook. Dr. Williams was preparing to leave but noticed my expression. Something interesting in Patterson's notes. His last entry. He wrote that he didn't think they were prisoners. Dr. Williams paused at the door. Patterson had a lot of theories toward the end. Not all of them were based on evidence. What do you think they are? The doctor considered the question carefully. I think they're exactly what the Vatican says they are. Beings that fell from grace and now require containment for the safety of both themselves and humanity. After Dr. Williams left, I spent the next several hours reviewing files and familiarizing myself with the monitoring systems. Each resident had detailed medical records, behavioral assessments, and daily logs dating back years or even decades. The more I read, the more questions arose. These beings showed no signs of aggression or hostility. Their daily routines seemed peaceful, almost meditative. Some appeared to be creating art or solving complex problems. Others simply existed in states of quiet contemplation. At 6 p.m, I decided to conduct my own observation tour. I had spent hours studying the monitoring systems and felt confident I could navigate the facility safely. The evening shift guards were experienced professionals who knew the routines of each resident. I walked the circular hallway, stopping at each occupied cell to watch the residents. Most ignored my presence, continuing their activities as if I weren't there. A few acknowledged me with brief glances or subtle nods that suggested awareness without concern. Cell 9 contained a woman who spent her time painting murals on her walls. The artwork was beautiful and complex, depicting scenes that looked like they might be memories from another world. When I appeared at her window, she paused in her painting and approached the glass. "I'm Blake," I said, knowing she probably couldn't hear me through the soundproofing but hoping she might understand. The woman smiled and pointed to herself, then to a section of her mural that showed a figure with wings. She had painted herself as she used to be, I realized. The painting showed her in what appeared to be a garden, surrounded by people who looked up at her with expressions of gratitude and joy. Cell 14 housed a man who my files identified as Uriel. Unlike the others, Uriel spent most of his time standing at his window, watching the hallway. When I approached, Uriel pressed his hand against the glass and spoke, though I couldn't hear the words. I placed my own hand against the glass, matching Uriel's position. For a moment, I felt a strange sensation, like an echo of emotion that wasn't my own. Sadness, regret, but also hope. Then Uriel stepped back and returned to his vigil. When I reached cell 17, I found Raphael sitting on his bed, facing the door. The being appeared to be a man in his 30s, with short brown hair and gentle features. He looked directly at me and smiled. Then he began to hum. The sound filled the hallway, a complex melody that seemed to have multiple harmonies layered within it. I found myself listening intently, trying to identify the pattern or meaning behind the music. Other residents responded to the humming. Nephilia stopped drawing and tilted her head toward her door. Bael paused in his folding. The woman called Seraph, who had stood motionless for 7 years, opened her eyes for the first time since I had arrived. When the humming stopped, exactly 17 minutes later, the facility returned to its usual quiet state. But something had changed. I could feel it, though I couldn't identify what it was. I returned to my office and made my first entry in the daily log. Day 1. Raphael's humming appears to be a form of communication with other residents. Need to research previous incidents of coordinated behavior. Recommend continued observation without intervention. As I locked my office and prepared to leave for the night, I wondered if Patterson had been right. These beings didn't seem like prisoners at all. They seemed like they were waiting for something. I just wasn't sure what. My second week at the facility began with an incident report on my desk and a cup of coffee that had grown cold while I slept poorly in my Vatican-provided apartment above ground. The dreams had started on my 3rd night. Not nightmares exactly, but vivid sequences that felt more like memories than imagination. I had dismissed them as stress from the new job until I found the incident report. During the night shift, Nephilia had stopped drawing equations and started writing words instead. The guard who discovered this had photographed her work before the usual midnight reset, erased everything, following protocols established years earlier. I studied the photographs with growing unease. Written in neat script across the white floor were the words, "The Warden has questions." The handwriting was precise and elegant, completely different from the mathematical symbols she usually created. More disturbing was the realization that this was exactly what I had been thinking about before falling asleep the previous night. I called Dr. Williams immediately. "She's never written words before," the doctor confirmed over the phone. "Only mathematical formulas and diagrams. This is completely new behavior." "How could she know I have questions?" "The cells are soundproofed." "Officially, yes. But we've learned that sound isn't their only method of communication." I spent the morning reviewing surveillance footage from the previous night. The cameras showed Nephilia drawing as usual until approximately 2 in the morning, when she suddenly stopped and began writing the message. Her movements were deliberate and confident, as if she had planned exactly what to write. At lunch, I decided to visit her cell directly. I found Nephilia sitting in her usual position, but this time, she faced the door. When she saw me, she stood and approached the window. I had read that she hadn't spoken to humans in over 20 years, so I was surprised when she placed her hand against the glass and spoke clearly. "You want to know what we're waiting for?" Her voice was calm and pleasant, with no trace of accent or unusual inflection. She sounded like any ordinary person having a casual conversation. "Yes," I admitted. "I do. We're waiting for someone to ask the right question." "What's the right question?" "That's not it." She returned to her position on the floor and resumed drawing equations, leaving me standing at the window with more questions than before. That afternoon, I called a meeting with Dr. Williams and the senior guard staff. I wanted to discuss the changing behavior patterns and determine if new protocols were needed. In the past 2 weeks, we've documented 17 instances of unusual activity, I began. Nephilia's communication, changes in sleep patterns among multiple residents, and Raphael's humming has extended from 17 minutes to 23 minutes. Guard Captain Morrison, a woman who had worked at the facility for 8 years, raised her hand. Sir, with respect, unusual activity is normal down here. These beings have never followed predictable patterns. But coordinated behavior is different, I replied. They're responding to each other in ways that suggest planning or shared purpose. Dr. Williams leaned forward. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we're missing something fundamental about their situation. Patterson's notes indicate he had similar concerns. Patterson also requested transfer to a different assignment because he believed the residents were influencing his thoughts, Captain Morrison pointed out. His observations became increasingly unreliable. I had read those reports too. In his final weeks, Patterson had claimed the residents were communicating with him telepathically, showing him visions of events outside the facility. The Vatican had classified his statements as evidence of psychological breakdown caused by prolonged exposure to the subjects. Nevertheless, I want to conduct interviews with the residents who are willing to speak, I announced, starting with Nephilia. Dr. Williams looked uncomfortable. The protocols discourage extended interaction with the subjects. Brief observation is considered safer for staff mental health. I'm not staff, I'm the warden, and if these beings are planning something, I need to understand what it is. The interview room was a small, windowless space adjacent to the main facility. I had never seen it used, but the equipment appeared functional and well-maintained. 2 comfortable chairs faced each other across a simple table, and recording devices mounted in the corners would document everything said during the conversation. The room felt neutral, designed to put both participants at ease. Nephilia entered accompanied by 2 guards, though she showed no signs of resistance or hostility. If anything, she seemed pleased by the opportunity to speak with me directly. She wore the same gray dress I had seen her in before, and her movements were graceful and unhurried. Up close, I could see that she appeared to be in her 30s, with intelligent eyes and an expression of patient kindness. Thank you for agreeing to speak with me, I said as she took the chair across from me. I had expected this to feel more formal, more interrogation-like, but Nephilia's presence made the atmosphere feel more like a conversation between colleagues. Thank you for asking the right questions. I thought you said I hadn't asked the right question yet. You haven't, but you're thinking the right questions. That's progress. She folded her hands on the table and smiled. Your predecessor asked many questions, but they were all about how to maintain control. You're asking questions about why control is necessary. I activated the recording equipment. Let's start with something simple. What's your real name? I don't remember it. I've been Nephilia for so long that my original identity has faded. How long have you been here? Since the beginning. I was the first resident, the prototype for determining if this place could work. Work for what purpose? Nephilia considered the question carefully. To keep us safe while we wait. Safe from what? From ourselves, from humanity, from the consequences of what we did before we fell. I leaned forward. What did you do? We tried to help. We thought we understood what humans needed, so we intervened in their affairs. We prevented wars, cured diseases, stopped natural disasters. We thought we were being compassionate. That doesn't sound like something that would require punishment. Intent and result are often different things. When you prevent a war, you change the course of history. When you cure a disease, you alter the population. When you stop a natural disaster, you shift the balance of the environment. We saved millions of lives, but we also destroyed the natural order. I felt a chill of understanding. You weren't cast out for rebellion, you were cast out for interfering. Free will requires the freedom to fail, to suffer, to learn from mistakes. We took that away believing we were showing mercy. Instead, we were showing arrogance. So, you're here voluntarily? We're here by agreement. The Vatican provides a place where we can exist without influencing human events. In return, we share our knowledge through controlled channels. Nephilia's mathematical discoveries, Bale's artistic creations, Raphael's music, all filtered through human intermediaries to prevent direct influence. I sat back in my chair, processing this information. Then why do the files describe you as dangerous prisoners? Because that's what the world needs to believe. If humanity knew we were here willingly, they would demand direct access to our knowledge. They would want us to solve their problems, cure their diseases, prevent their disasters. We would be forced to repeat our mistakes. What are you waiting for? Nephilia smiled. For someone to understand that we're not the solution to humanity's problems. We're a cautionary tale about the dangers of having solutions imposed rather than earned. And when someone understands that, then our purpose here will be complete. I turned off the recording equipment. You think I'm that someone? I think you're asking the right questions. Whether you reach the right conclusions remains to be seen. That evening, I reviewed the recording multiple times. Nephilia's explanation made sense of many things I had observed. The peaceful behavior, the willing cooperation with containment procedures, the intellectual pursuits that seemed designed to benefit humanity rather than threaten it. I spent the weekend reading Patterson's complete files, including the classified reports about his mental state. Patterson had reached similar conclusions, but his approach had been different. Instead of accepting the being's voluntary status, he had argued for their release. I could see how that perspective would be considered dangerous by Vatican authorities. If these beings were truly waiting for humanity to learn a specific lesson, then releasing them prematurely could undermine that purpose. On Monday morning, I requested interviews with 3 more residents: Bael, Raphael, and the boy with the floating book, whose file name was Gabriel. Bael's interview confirmed Nephilia's account. He explained that his origami creations were mathematical models designed to help human scientists understand complex theoretical concepts. The midnight dissolution was a built-in safety feature, preventing the knowledge from being misused before humanity was ready for it. Each star contains the solution to a different scientific challenge, Bael explained. Clean energy, faster than light travel, cellular regeneration. But if humans obtain these solutions too quickly, they would use them as weapons or tools of oppression. Raphael's humming, I learned, was a form of meditation that helped maintain emotional balance among the residents. The increasing duration indicated that their waiting period was approaching its end. How do you know? I asked. Because you're here, Raphael replied. Because you're asking questions instead of simply maintaining the status quo. Change is coming, and we can feel it. Gabriel's interview was the most revealing. Despite his apparent youth, he spoke with wisdom that suggested centuries of experience. I read the same book over and over because it reminds me why we fell, Gabriel explained. It's about moral courage, about doing what's right even when it's difficult. We thought we were showing courage by intervening in human affairs. We were actually showing cowardice because we were afraid to let humans face their challenges alone. What happens when the waiting period ends? That depends on what humanity has learned. If they've grown wise enough to understand the value of struggle and failure, we'll be allowed to move on to our next purpose. If not, we'll remain here until they do. And what's your next purpose? Gabriel smiled. To find other species making the same mistakes we did and help them learn the same lessons without having to fall as far as we did. I spent the next several days writing my report for Cardinal Bishop. The conclusions I had reached would likely be difficult for Vatican authorities to accept, but I felt obligated to present the truth as I understood it. The residents of Sublevel 17 are not prisoners requiring containment. They are volunteers participating in an educational process designed to benefit humanity. Their presence here serves as a test of human wisdom and maturity. I recommend maintaining current protocols while acknowledging the true nature of their residence. Any attempt to extract information or services from them against their will would undermine the purpose of their sacrifice and likely result in their immediate departure. The recent changes in behavior indicate that their waiting period is approaching its natural conclusion. Humanity's response to this knowledge will determine whether they remain or move on to other responsibilities. I submitted the report and waited for a response. 3 days later, Cardinal Bishop arrived at the facility with a team of senior Vatican officials. "Your assessment is troubling," the Cardinal began. "You're suggesting we release beings whose power could reshape the world. I'm suggesting we acknowledge that they were never truly imprisoned, and that their continued presence here is contingent on our understanding of why they came. And if we refuse to accept your conclusions?" I looked around the observation deck at the peaceful scenes below. Nephilia drawing her equations, Baal folding his stars, Gabriel reading his book. Then you'll wake up tomorrow morning to find empty cells and a facility that no longer serves any purpose. The Vatican officials spent hours debating my report. They interviewed Dr. Williams, reviewed surveillance footage, and examined every piece of evidence I had gathered. Finally, Cardinal Bishop returned to my office with their decision. "The Vatican accepts your assessment. We will acknowledge the voluntary nature of their residence and treat them as honored guests rather than prisoners. In return, we ask that they continue sharing their knowledge through appropriate channels." I nodded. "I'll convey your decision to them." That evening, I called a meeting in the observation deck. Word had somehow spread throughout the facility, and all 27 residents had positioned themselves where they could see and hear me clearly. Some stood at their windows, others sat near their doors, but all faced toward the observation deck with expressions of calm attention. I felt the weight of the moment as I looked out at beings who had lived for centuries, who had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, who had chosen exile rather than risk harming humanity again. The responsibility of speaking for my entire species seemed overwhelming, but I knew this was why I had been chosen for this position. "The Vatican has accepted the truth about your situation," I announced, my voice carrying clearly through the facility's intercom system. "You're free to leave whenever you choose, but you're welcome to stay as long as you wish." Nephilia stood and spoke for all of them, her voice somehow audible throughout the facility despite the soundproofing. I suspected there were aspects of their abilities that the Vatican had never fully understood or documented. "Our work here is finished. Humanity has learned to ask the right questions and accept difficult answers. We'll depart at midnight. Where will you go?" "To find others who need to learn the same lessons. There are young species throughout the universe making the same mistakes we once made. They need guides who understand the consequences of good intentions without wisdom." I looked around the observation deck one final time. "Is there anything humanity should know? Any message you want to leave?" Nephilia considered the question carefully. "Tell them that the greatest gift they possess is their ability to fail and learn from failure. Tell them that struggle builds character in ways that ease never can. Tell them that the universe is full of beings who care about their success, but who care too much to interfere with their growth." At midnight, I stood in the observation deck and watched the cells empty one by one. The residents didn't simply vanish. Instead, they seemed to dissolve into light, fading gradually until only empty rooms remained. Each departure felt like a presence leaving my mind, as if connections I hadn't realized existed were being gently severed. Some residents took time to complete final tasks. Baal folded one last origami star and placed it carefully on his table before departing. The woman who painted murals added a final detail to her artwork. Gabriel closed his book and set it on his bed, where future scholars might find it. The last to leave was Nephilia. Before her departure, she approached her window and wrote one final message on the floor. "Thank you for understanding." In the morning, I submitted my final report and resigned from my position. The Vatican offered me other assignments, recognizing my unique skills in handling extraordinary situations, but I felt my work was complete. The facility was converted into a research center where human scientists studied the mathematical formulas, artistic patterns, and musical compositions left behind by the former residents. I returned to my previous job in corrections, working with human prisoners who faced more ordinary challenges. But I never forgot the lesson I had learned in the depths of the Vatican. Sometimes the greatest act of courage is allowing others to find their own way, even when you have the power to make their journey easier. The former prisoners had taught humanity that wisdom cannot be given, only earned. And in learning that lesson, humanity had proven they were ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. I often wondered if other worlds had similar facilities, if other species were learning the same difficult truths about growth and independence. Years later, when I had become a respected reformer in the correction system, I would sometimes share parts of my experience with colleagues who were struggling with the balance between helping and enabling. I never mentioned the Vatican or the true nature of the beings I had supervised, but the lessons they had taught me continued to guide my work. The universe, I had learned, was full of teachers. The wisdom was in recognizing them and having the courage to learn.